Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome tonight's main speaker, Sir Alan Yarrow, who will reflect on his term as Lord Mayor of the City of London. Sir Alan.
Your Excellency, Magna Masters, ladies and gentlemen, Christopher, thank you for inviting us. Gillian and I are thrilled to be here. And thank you to all those for all your support throughout the year. We couldn't have done it without the livery, the Mansion House staff, the Corporation of London, everybody who's involved in city business, the Foreign Office, and certainly not least of all, the appeal team, who are incredibly important to give us a huge amount of support during our year. Now, let's just go back a bit into 2014. 1215, that's a Magna Carta. Gillian and I were sort of working out, we got this wonderful prospect of being, I was going to be Lord Mayor during the election year. And an election where I manifestly had absolutely no agreement at all with the opposition, which is going to be difficult because the Lord Mayor has to be apolitical. And it was quite tricky, actually, as to how I was going to cope with all my stakeholders who are basically fundamentally capitalists. And we were likely to have a potential socialist, traditional socialist, as being the Prime Minister. So we racked our brains as to what would be the right tagline, actually, which really manifested something that was important. So we came up with those 6 humble words of creating wealth, giving time, supporting people. Because we believed, I think, quite rightly, that was what the City of London genuinely believed in. And there's no point in fibbing about it. The fact is that we are there to create wealth. Anyway, it was an election year, and it was fun. It was a great, by God, it was a wonderful year. And we both of us thoroughly enjoyed it, didn't we, darling? It was terrific. And it was made all the better because of all of you. It really was. And, you know, the fact of the day is that we had these anniversaries called the Magna Carta, you know, Waterloo, Agincourt, all that stuff. But Magna Carta was actually critically, it turned out to be an absolutely critical memorial, because actually at the end of the day, 800 years of the most important part of our Constitution, which is written, it's the only part of our Constitution, if it was honest, which is written. And it then started to come to the fore that actually it was going to appear pretty consistently throughout the whole of the year when I was Lord Mayor. You probably know that Max, our eldest son, is disabled. He's a wonderful chap. I mean, he's the most extraordinary man. He's got a very, very, very high EQ. He can tell emotions in a room just like that. And so consequently, he's one of those people who's got a sunny disposition if he thinks people like him. And he's one of those people we have a huge affection for as a family. But he lives in sheltered accommodation. There's a family, Scope look after him. They look after him extremely well. So we wanted to do our bit with our appeal by making sure that disability got properly recognised in the city. And that's why MenCap and Scope became an important part of our lives, because they've taken us through a very difficult journey, let's be honest, and they've made our life much more acceptable. And we wanted to make sure if we actually got something raised through the appeal, we could actually share some of that with those other people who are going to go through the same problems that we went through. And don't forget that as we go through looking at life today, our children and our grandchildren are now getting married later. And that in itself runs a risk. And one mustn't lose sight of it. So disability at the moment, a disabled child is born every 10 minutes. So that is an important critical point. And if we don't have the support services there to make sure they can run sensible lives and be included, then we've got a problem. So inclusion was critical. So when we came down to looking at the thing about diversity, this Lord Mayor wasn't just on gender, because that's what Fiona did. I was on disability. And I have to say, we had a phenomenal reaction from the City of London when we started talking about disability, which is a very good reflection about what was going on. I'll come back to that in a minute, if I may. Now, I'm a banker. And when I started in the city, I was very, very proud to be in the city because, crikey, it's the best place to be. It was frightfully smart. People bought very smart clothes and so on. But in the period I've been here only for 43 years, in that period, there's no doubt if you went to Sussex or somewhere or some person's working, they wouldn't want to admit the fact that they're now working in the city because of the abuse that took place in 2007-8, or the build-up to the crash. And therefore, as the banking Lord Mayor, I thought it was my duty was to somehow get better self-respect into the city, to make sure we were more confident. Very few people realise, actually, that this engine room of the country, and I say engine room of the country advisedly because our net exports, sorry, it's going to be very dull, economic statistic coming out, our net exports from the financial professional services aren't only just as great as all the net exports aggregated from every other part of this country's economy. It's 2.5 times as great. So that is the point. It is a phenomenal engine. It employs 2.2 million people directly. And if you actually look at the multiplier, that's probably, if you multiply it by 5, that's about 10.5 million. It's a good percentage of the working population are affected by the success or failure of the professional financial services in this country. And we were doing a lousy job about marketing it. Now, I am a salesman as well as a banker. And I've got absolutely no doubt that we were being incredibly British about what we were good at. And that was unacceptable. Because I think that this great thing about being self-deprecating, if you're not careful, can be self-destructive. And the reason why I say that is if you look to see if you had a really socialist government come into this country, and they turned around to the country and said, the city, the financial services, we don't like them, do we? Nobody would just put their hand up and say, actually, they're very important. Why? Because we haven't spent our time going out there telling them how critically important that we have a world standard leading industry in this country. And we should be incredibly proud of it. The Swiss would be proud of their pharmaceuticals. The Germans of their car manufacture. And yet we spend our whole time denigrating that one thing that we're good at. So I went to see the Bank of England, the governor, Mark Carney, who I know really quite well now, and I went to see him just before I came Lord Mayor, and I said, look, I think we've got a problem, and it's going to be a difficult conversation. Has everyone got social media on? Could you turn it off, please? That is that one of our biggest problems is the Bank of England itself hasn't admitted it got it wrong, which is an interesting conversation, because there's no doubt, actually the reality is that that is the mother of the City of London. And the old lady sat there, and she had to accept the fact that she got it wrong. And Carney, to be fair, he was incredibly good about it, and he said, well, that's interesting, let's discuss it. So we went on, I also went on to talk about regulation, because that's also important. And the fact in the day is that regulators sitting up an ivory tower, throwing down thunderbolts on industry, where the industry itself doesn't recognise the regulation, isn't the way to regulate an industry. What you do is you get the industry to regulate itself and identify with those rules so they can see into places where the regulator can't get to. So they actually carry forward the principles and the spirit of that regulation. We got on extremely well, I have to say, and he totally agreed with me. And the big day was going to be the 10th of June. I say the 10th of June because that was the bankers' dinner. I then went to go and see the Prime Minister. We had a very similar discussion, not talking about the Bank of England at this stage, but basically talking about regulation, that we needed to stop the rot, actually of constantly killing the one global standards we've got. And as we're building up to the election, obviously, it was a question as to whether I'm going to be talking to the right man. And don't forget, it was quite a surprise, actually, how big the majority was they got. But he was definitely listening. So that was going on in the background. Now, meantime, back at home, I'd come across this document, which had been produced by the Minister of Justice, explaining how a person of special needs describes that they're innocent of a certain act. Now, I found this absolutely fascinating. Here we are, a country, 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, and we're telling a special needs person how to explain they're innocent. Well, I was brought up to believe you were innocent until proven guilty. And so have a document that's explaining to someone who's the most vulnerable person in our society that they are effectively having to explain their innocence was totally and utterly unacceptable. So I decided to make a big issue of this reversal of the burden of proof. And thank God I did, because actually what happened next was even more interesting. The regulation came out that senior management of financial service companies were also guilty until proven innocent. Again, the major tenet of the Magna Carta, 800 years earlier, our basic ethos of this country was being run roughshod over, probably because the criminal prosecution service couldn't get prosecutions. But the fact at the end of the day was, it was unacceptable. So I got very energised about it. Unfortunately, I'm probably too energetic about it, and one of the quite interesting comments the papers appeared. But it was important to make that point. So we then had the judges' dinner. And so David will remember this. David, by the way, was my Lord Mayor, I was his sheriff. Everything I do, I learned from him. I decided to go and get the previous Lord Chief Justice in for a chat. So I said, look, just out of minute, what are we going to talk about? And he said, well, Lord Mayor, it's your speech. What do you want to talk about? And I said, I want to talk about the reverse of the burden of proof. He said, I wouldn't do that. So I said, why? He said, you've spoken about it already 3 times. So I said, really? How do you know that? He said, well, I've listened to 2 of them. And he said, the government's heard the message. Now, I say that to you because because it's important. The government had heard the message. The soft power of the mayoralty is quite extraordinary. I had no idea at this stage how powerful it was. So I said, okay, so what would the judges like me to discuss? We're going to have Gove in the room, and Michael Gove just been pointed out as Lord Chancellor. So they said, we'd like to talk about legal aid. So we got a very good punchy speech on legal aid, saying if we don't actually get legal aid properly supported, and just remind you again about the Magna Carta, justice is just as available to the poor as it is to the rich. And what they were doing to legal aid was definitely the wrong thing. So we decided to go and actually bank on pushing very hard on legal aid. And the other thing is that judges today, criminal judges, come from the criminal bar. And if you don't have young barristers coming through, you ain't going to have judges later on. So there was a big problem in the rubber tree. These guys were not coming through because of legal aid had collapsed. So I put through a very punchy speech. And Gove, to give him his due, listened. We then heard from the government that they reversed what they'd done about the reverse of burden of proof, and they changed it round to what it should have been. Gove then came out and then said he was going to change the situation on legal aid. So 9/10 of what they'd done before had been reversed. So that was 2 ticks and 2 boxes. And the following Monday after the judges' dinner, John Thomas, the Lord Chief Justice of today, Raoul Igor, who was the previous one, came and said, oh, Lord Mayor, can you do us one more favour? So I said, well, like anything else, you make the case, he said quite smugly, and I'll see what we've got to do about it. And I said, but make it simple, because I'm not very bright, and I've got to make sure I understand it. So he made a very good positive case as to why we should digitise the Royal Courts of Justice. It was going to save us as a country 300 million a year. And I said, right, can you write that down on a piece of paper so I can say that to the Prime Minister, I can repeat it. And he did, and 10 days later I saw Cameron in St Paul's, and I said to him, Prime Minister, can we have a chat? And you must remember, of course, that the Lord Mayor, actually, fun enough, is more important than the Prime Minister in the City of London. So he said, Lord Mayor, why don't we walk and talk? So I actually made the case about digitising the Royal Courts of Justice. And Cameron said, quite reasonably, so I thought, you've already done that. And I said, well, I thought so too, but you apparently haven't. And you could actually save the country a lot of money. So he said, well, fine, thank you very much, dear Lord Mayor, that's very interesting. And he went away, and I sent him a letter confirming our conversation with all the 5 points I'd covered in our conversation. And I saw him again 2 weeks later. And I said, again, because I can't ask this as Lord Mayor, I can't do it now, but I could then. I said, Prime Minister, I haven't heard back from you on my letter. And he said, you're quite right, Lord Mayor, I apologise for that, but actually you're going to hear in 10 days' time. And in 10 days, we had the spending review from Osborne. Number 7, money was made available for the Royal Courts of Justice to digitise the Royal Courts of Justice. Another tick in the box. Now, the reason why I'm telling you that story, those 3 stories, is because do not underestimate the power of soft power. You can get influence. If you get the right people at the right time, arguing the right case, you can get things done, and done very, very quickly in this country. So the mayoralty effectively is a very, very important position. Much, much more important than I ever thought it was when I first decided to go and do it. Now, having moved, I'm going to move on to my notes now, so you know what I'm doing. Right at the beginning of my Admiralty, again, we had Andy Haldane, who wrote a very interesting argument on volunteering. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was absolutely fascinating. He tried to calculate the impact on the economy of people who volunteered to do things. And he reckoned the value was somewhere between 25 to 28 billion pounds, which is a lot of money. And what people didn't look at was the appendix. If you went into the appendix and saw the real detail of his analysis, you'd have found a footnote which said, and what is more, the well-being impact on the person who's done the volunteering is probably twice to double that. Doubles 3 times that, beg your pardon. So you were talking about somewhere between 50 to 75 billion, the impact on the productivity and the loyalty of that person who's working for that company. And it just so happened, that all happened at the same time as I was sitting quietly waiting for my train at Earls Court Tube Station one day. Yes, I do travel by tube occasionally. And I got on this train and it was full of school children. And as I walked on, this school child got up from her chair and said, "Would you like to sit down?" And I thought, crikey, I must be looking dreadful. And I said, no, it's fine, don't worry, I'll hang on to the pole. Yeah. And talk to your teacher. And so I started talking to the teacher. I said, just out of interest, where have you been? And she said, we've been to see Midsummer Night's Dream at the Globe Theatre. So I said, fantastic, how many? Well, there are 3 teachers, 65 kids, and we've had a great time. I said, how did you do that? Deutsche Bank paid for it. So I said, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Does anyone else know that? I wonder. So I came back and I thought, you know, isn't it interesting? I remember reading in the papers that we now have some of the best central London schools in the country. And yet 5 or 10 years ago, we had all the Sync schools were actually central London schools. So what's actually changed? And you start talking to Deloitte, you start talking to Linklaters, you start talking to the heart of the city, and you realise actually what's happened is there's been a huge inclusion taking place of businesses going out there and talking and teaching and mentoring and reading and sorting things out in what's going on in the London schools and in other things as well. Now the reason why I say this, I'm not in any way being critical of delivery. You guys have always been actually extraordinarily successful in what you've done. But what wasn't being shouted about, in my mind, was actually what the companies were doing. You guys are so shy of talking about what you do, I thought I might be able to work on the other way. So I thought maybe we can get something better. So we did some research and we found only 20% of people in their own organisations knew what their company did. Well, isn't that extraordinary? If the other 80% knew, maybe more people would volunteer. Maybe more people would do what they wanted to do. So I got Caroline and Sarah and everyone else in the appeal geared up. And I said, Ron, we've got to go and sort this one out. What about having a day where the British are allowed to brag? In other words, if they all do it together, it can't be considered as bragging. We all told not to brag. So we decided to have this thing called City Giving Day. And I reckon if you get 50 of the top companies of the City of London or around to come and actually just come out and get those people who've benefited from what they've done to come into the city, maybe then we might get more people to do it. We ended up with 205 companies in September doing it, and it was the most spectacular day. And it was absolutely terrific. And you know, Gilly went round, I went round, and there's a really fantastic feeling of goodwill. And you met the people who benefited from it. And I would challenge anybody not to say they didn't feel that day was a great success. Because the reality is, now, today, I hope, more people will be doing it as we go forward. So we can actually build on that thing of getting the city better understood. And again, it goes back to this point. I heard how many people here went to Imperial College? Not bad, that's quite good. What do you know about City and Guilds? Well, those people who don't know about City and Guilds, I know I've bored you pretty about this before, but I'll try you again. City and Guilds set up by 16 delivery companies back in the 1870s. They merged part of it with the School of Mines and College of Science, and they built Imperial College. That came from a generous of the City of London. No one knows about that. Not enough people talk about it. It's another thing about talking about the value of having the City of London. What does the other part of City and Guilds do? It does trade accreditation. What's that mean? It means plumbers are plumbers, electricians, bricklayers and so on. How many accreditations have they done since the year 2000? Somebody tell me. Thousands. 35 million. Does anyone talk about it? No. Take Lloyd's Register. Lloyd's Register. Shipping, servicing, looking at ships. How many of those smart subjects, of STEM subjects, do they effectively affect in children? 750,000 children benefit from Lloyd's Register's work. Do we talk about it? No, we don't. Why don't we? Because we don't know about it. And yet, if people really genuinely spent some time talking about these things, perhaps people might think a little bit better about what we're trying to achieve here. So that was the whole message of what we're trying to achieve during our year, is trying to have some impact of a better view. Now, if I can just move on to slightly different commentary, and that's talking about what actually happens internationally. As you probably know, the Lord Mayor does loads of foreign visits. And just occasionally, he finds himself in a difficult position. And I can tell you I was in Malaysia, and my mother started a charity in Johor Bahru called Jaro, and we went to see Jaro, and it was a wonderful visit because here was a boy born in Johor who's now the Lord Mayor of London, and they went absolutely cock-a-hoop about it. We had we had line dancers, we had drums, we had the whole thing. It was bloody marvellous. And the charity was on its knees basically, so they could use this as publicity to really get the promotion out there. And it was a terrific day, and we absolutely loved it, didn't we, Di? It was fabulous. And we were then asked to lunch with the Sultan of Johor. Now, Sultan of Johor is quite a character, I have to tell you. He's got his own private army, he's extraordinarily wealthy, and having just come from a penniless charity, my first discussion with him was actually what colour ceiling he was going to have his new Rolls Royce he's ordered. Which I found quite tricky, I have to tell you, so the High Commissioner had to help me out a bit. And we worked that one through all right, then we got on to houses, and he said he was building himself a house on the coast. As we're building ourselves a house on the coast, so we had something in common, which is terrific. Ours is about 5,500 square feet, which is quite big. His is 85,500 square feet. So I said, trying to be helpful, I said, and so what sort of style is it? God knows why I asked that question. Anyway, I did. And he said Flintstones. So I said, how very nice. Sort of Sussex Flintstones, Hampshire. No. He got his iPad from under his head, and there was a picture of him dressed as Fred Flintstone. This is absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Anyway, so you had a pretty good idea actually about where we were, and I did actually ask if his wife was Wilma, and he said no, she wasn't. So I don't know who Wilma was. But anyway, I then went on to say what happened to the car. He said he's got a 150 classic car, so he's bought the Flintstones car. He has bought the Flintstones car. So he's got everything. Dino was in the garden. He showed me a picture of a large dinosaur in the garden. So there you go. That's what happens when you go on these trips. You learn lots of things. Now, it's not just going outside. It's also actually what comes in. You've got to understand that the Mansion House is the most extraordinary engine. Actually, it doesn't look as if it really moves, but it does. It's a fantastic machine. We have 75,000 people through that building every year, and that's a huge amount. You could actually leave a dinner at 10:30 or 11:15, and I'd go out and walk the dog, and I'd come back and the whole place is tidied up. It's quite extraordinary. I wish you'd have them at home, actually, much easier. But you have about 120 really seriously important people come and see you as the Lord Mayor. Not only do you go and see 28 countries, but you have quite a good incoming crowd. So we had Xi Jinping, not unimportant. He was the president of China. And I'd just come back from China, and I kept on asking everybody which football club he followed. Because I was told it was Manchester City by one Chinaman and Manchester United by another one, and I was getting incredibly confused. So when he came to stay in our house, he stayed all day, most of the day in the house. I insisted on going to see him. They said, I must come and see the president. So he said, well, what do you want to go see about? I said, I'm the Lord Mayor, I want to go and see the President, I have to tell you what I want to talk about. So I walk in, I ask him the question, I said, is it Manchester City or is it Manchester United? And he wouldn't tell me. And I asked him why not, and he said because they've got Chinese people in the team of both teams, and he didn't want to upset either of them. So it was interesting. So we then had the day. I don't know if who's heard the story about when the Mexican president came for dinner. No? All right. Well, this was a lovely, lovely occasion. I mean, this was fantastic. The Mexicans do love a good party. And my God, they do know how to party. Anyway, the day came when the president and his very, very, very attractive wife was there. And the reason why I say very, very attractive wife is that she was. And what was more interesting was, if you are married, you stay in Buck House. If you're not married, like Sarkozy and Carla Bruni, you stay in Windsor. I didn't know that. Did you know? Learn something every evening. Anyway, so we have this situation where we are now standing on horse guards, and I think it's quite smart this, because there are only about 14 of you on the dais. That's it. But in front of you, you have 400 guards with their busbies on. Then behind them, you've got the Blues and Royals and the Household Cavalry in all their tin, plumes, and God, they look smart, terrific. And these great big cart horses, the drums, they're all playing the music. And it is absolutely stunning. The sun's shining, you do wonder why you're there. So we had there Cameron, Theresa May, Clegg, because he was there then, the Lord Mayor, my two extremely good sheriffs, Army, Navy, Air Force, Police, and London. That was it. No one else was there. That's right. Andrew Ford was there, who was the organiser of the ceremony. That was it. Up sweeps this stunning Bentley. I must say, talk about an advert for the United Kingdom. Terrific, owned by the Germans. Comes in, circles round, and out gets the Queen and Prince Philip. And they come up the steps, and they go down the line, and the Queen goes, good morning, good morning, good morning. Sorry, good morning, good morning. Right down the line. And it was terrific, and we felt as if you'd really been honoured. And she turns around, she comes down, and just before she gets to me, about a couple of months before, my speechwriter had come into me and said, Lord Mac, have you thought about what you're going to say in your speech at the state visit for the Mexican president? So I said, no, I haven't. I said, but I want to talk about chocolate. So she said, why chocolate? I said, well, it's an aphrodisiac. I said, let's make the thing exciting. There are really exciting people in Mexico. Let's have a really interesting speech. So now we go away and find out something interesting about chocolate. And little did I realise that she went to Colombia. She was actually fun enough going into Colombia anyway, but it just so happened she went there. And she came back just after about 2 weeks in Colombia. She burst into my office. She said, no, I've got something terribly urgent to tell you. So I said, why? I've got the answers to the question about the speech in front of the Mexican president. So I said, really? What's that? He said, 2 words. So what's that? Anyone speak Spanish here? Well, the 2 words. Let me tell my story. The 2 words are que rico, which means very tasty. That's right, I got the thumbs up, that's fine. Very tasty. So I thought well, why just put it in the speech, fantastic. So now we go back again to the dais. The Queen's coming down the line, having said good morning, and she stands in front of me. Would you believe it? And she says, Lord Mayor, do you have any Spanish? So I said, Your Majesty, I happen to have a couple of words in Spanish. Oh, do tell me, what are they? Que rico, Your Majesty. Oh, she says, what does that mean? Very tasty, Your Majesty. Oh, she says, I hope you're not talking about the President's wife. And that is a true story. By the way, please don't pass it on, because I'm not supposed to talk about it. You've probably noticed in the papers recently people got terrible trouble. Now, I'm going to come to the end of my little ditty about what's going on, I'm afraid, sorry. But you can ask me questions after. But I wanted to say, right at the end, we did do this little poem, which we worked quite hard on. just to sort of give us an idea as to what life was like being Lord Mayor. Actually, what not life was like being Lord Mayor, actually what life might be like if you weren't Lord Mayor. I'll start now. When the silent ceremony was over, we were lying, reflecting in bed. This is the story of some advice we were given, and we will never forget what was said. Lord Mayor is not just an office of tradition. Your every need to succeed is supplied by a house that is honed to deliver at a depth that Julie and I were surprised. However, there'll be a time when you're feeling important. There'll be a time when your ego is in bloom. There'll be a time when you take it for granted that you're without doubt the best qualified man in the room. You hope and you feel that your going might leave an unfillable hole. Just follow these simple instructions and see how they humble your soul. Take a bucket and fill it with water. Put your hand in it up to the wrist. Put it out, and the hole that's remaining is a measure of how much you'll be missed. You can splash all you wish when you enter. You may stir up the water galore, but stop and you'll find that in no time it looks quite the same as before. The moral of this story is quite simple. It's to do just your best and show that you care. Be proud of yourself, but remember, there's no indispensable Lord Mayor. Thank you very much.